Despite all Donald Trump's loud statements about controlling the situation in the Middle East, the Iranian authorities have developed a secret plan to expand the war with the US and Israel. This was reported by the Wall Street Journal, citing intelligence data from several Arab countries. According to the publication's sources, Tehran's main goal is to inflict such damage on its opponents that it will forever prevent the repetition of massive strikes on the country's territory. And on the same day, a high-ranking Iranian official openly and directly confirmed that the Iranian leadership is indeed ready to escalate tensions in the Hormuz Strait and throughout the entire region, if diplomacy with the US ultimately does not bring results. And according to experts, this means Tehran is shifting from a defensive approach to a more offensive one. And now more and more sources are saying that Iran is using the current pause to build up its capabilities, to strengthen both its connections and proxy forces, as well as its own forces, in order to strike back with renewed strength. So, let's break down the whole picture in this episode and put it all together. My name is Alessi, or let's dive into this topic together. But before we start, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are moving towards the 300,000 subscriber mark, so I would appreciate every single subscription. So let's start with this specific secret plan by Iran to expand the war. I'll say right away, I often read comments with sarcastic remarks, like people think it's clever when they write, "How can this be a secret plan if everyone is talking about it?" And we're talking about it sometime after the fact. At the time it was being developed, it really was secret or classified. And the fact that journalists dig up information for you, information that would never have come to light otherwise, you should be saying thank you for that. Not making jokes like, how is this a secret plan? What are you talking about? Those smart people really get on my nose. Sorry, that was a bit of a digression right at the start. Let's get to the point.
According to sources from the Wall Street Journal, Iranian authorities have given the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps greater control over the country's regular army.
And seasoned veterans of the war with Iraq and supporters of strikes against Arab countries that host American bases have been appointed to key positions in the armed forces. At the same time, Iran is expanding counterintelligence operations and accelerating the production of missiles and drones, and announced the previous day that they are speeding up the development of a ballistic missile with a range of 15,000 kilometers. A possible direction for further escalation is sabotage of internet cables in the Persian Gulf and destabilization of the political situation in countries with Shia communities such as Kuwait and Bahrain. As I mentioned in the previous episode, this is very reminiscent of Russian tactics, that they supposedly come to Ukraine to protect Russian speakers, allegedly because they are being oppressed there. And the Iranians could do the same thing, claiming that Shia communities are allegedly being oppressed in Kuwait and Bahrain, so they are ready to protect them. Moreover, Wall Street Journal sources do not even rule out a possible ground operation by Iran in Kuwait. At the same time, according to the same sources, Tehran believes that US efforts to achieve a ceasefire are aimed only at reducing pressure on the global economy, and the negotiations themselves may just be an interlude before a new escalation of military actions. But at the same time, Iran is also concerned about the consequences of its own escalation. Government advisors consider it possible that the next stage of confrontation may go beyond traditional warfare and include attempts to provoke internal unrest similar to those that occurred at the beginning of January due to economic problems. Well, you remember those protests. The Israeli publication Wiley adds specifics about the regional dimension of Iran's plan. And according to their information, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps used the relative calm created by the memorandum, which, let me remind you, was signed in June of this year, to coordinate more closely with allied groups throughout the region and prepare them for expanded attacks if necessary. Accordingly, advisors were sent to Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon to discuss possible operations. And intercepted communications showed that commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps traveled to Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen in order to plan and intensify confrontation with Saudi Arabia together with Iran-backed Iraqi militias. Well, just a week ago, let me remind you, Riyadh raised the alarm that an attack was really being prepared against them from two directions at once, from Iraq and Yemen. And as it became known, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps coordinated the transfer of missiles, naval weapons, and drone launchers to positions from which the Red Sea can be targeted, and also provided the Houthis with intelligence data and target lists, which included Saudi ports and energy facilities, allowing it advice on protection against possible Saudi retaliation. At the same time, Iran also warned the Gulf countries through both open and closed channels that if the United States strikes targets inside Iran, their own energy infrastructure will be destroyed in response. Iranian commanders even went so far as to give their Arab counterparts similar lists of potential targets, specifying that if the US tries us, these specific sites in your country will be attacked. Iran increased its attacks directly on American servicemen. Here, the publication writes that Tehran surprised Washington by launching 5 ballistic missiles at Jordan during the lull in the conflict. This strike happened 2 weeks after another Iranian attack on Jordan, which took the lives of 3 American servicemen. And according to the IRID publication, the concern of officials from the Persian Gulf countries grew as the scale of Iranian attacks increased, and the missiles themselves increasingly penetrated the American air defense systems, specifically in the areas of eastern Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain. So it became clear that Iran could easily bypass American air defenses. But just so you don't think that these are just rumors, here is direct confirmation of this course from Tehran itself. According to Reuters, a high-ranking Iranian official publicly stated on Monday, the leadership of Iran is ready to escalate the situation in the Hormuz Strait and in the region as a whole if diplomatic efforts regarding the United States do not yield any results. The agency specifically emphasizes that this statement indicates Tehran's shift from a defensive approach to a more offensive one. In other words, it's no longer just a passive threat of retaliation, but a direct readiness to act first. In response to this, the United States is preparing its own escalation, but this time it's economic. Let me remind you, US President Donald Trump promised last Friday to deliver a strong blow to Iran's economy after his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced preparations for unprecedented measures against Tehran. Let's now analyze what specific levers the Donald Trump administration has. The first option is sanctions against independent Chinese oil refineries, which provide about a quarter of China's oil refining capacity and operate at low and sometimes even negative profitability. According to Kpra data, for 2025, Beijing purchases more than 80% of the oil exported by Iran, and a significant portion of these supplies goes specifically through these independent plants. Previous US measures have already forced larger independent enterprises to stop purchasing Iranian oil, but smaller refiners are essentially protected from American pressure since they are hardly connected to the American financial system. The second option is sanctions against Chinese banks themselves. And here, the Treasury has already imposed secondary sanctions against a number of companies in China and Hong Kong, which, according to Washington, helped carry out transactions involving Iranian oil and facilitated arms purchases. The US Treasury also warned 2 major Chinese banks about the possibility of restrictive measures but has not yet included them in the sanctions list, which it may do in the future. The third option is to continue playing cat and mouse. Sanctions against Iranian individuals and legal entities, as well as against intermediary companies in China and the Persian Gulf countries, helping Tehran circumvent restrictions. And let me remind you, the US Treasury recently already imposed measures against companies created to exchange Iran's oil revenues for imported goods. The fourth, the most radical option, is a land blockade of Iran. Some American and Israeli officials have considered this possibility, but its implementation would require the cooperation of Iraq, Turkey, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. The Trump administration has relations with all of these countries except Afghanistan, although the closeness of these relationships varies. And now experts warn that a land blockade could increase pressure on ordinary Iranians by restricting food supplies, energy resources, textiles, But implementing such a scenario is extremely difficult, and it is unclear whether it could bring about a political shift within the country. And the fifth option is secondary tariffs. Trump has repeatedly threatened to impose tariffs on goods from countries that continue to do business with Iran. But the US Supreme Court, let me remind you, has overturned the legal basis for such a mechanism. However, the US Senate recently approved a large scale sanctions bill against Russia, which also includes new restrictions against Iran, giving Trump additional powers in trade policy. Theoretically, they can also be applied against countries that help Tehran circumvent the restrictions. To understand the scale, since the beginning of Trump's second term, more than 1,000 Iranians, as well as ships and airplanes, have already come under sanctions. In conclusion, both sides are clearly preparing for escalation right now, except each country is preparing for its own kind of escalation. While in Tehran, they are secretly preparing military infrastructure for a new, more destructive phase of the conflict, in Washington, they are preparing to shift the economic pressure in 5 directions at once. From sanctions against Chinese oil refineries to a theoretical land blockade of Iran. This creates a situation where both sides are simultaneously preparing for the next round. Iran is preparing militarily, the US is preparing economically, and the formal ceasefire remains just a pause. A pause that, according to Tehran itself, both sides are using to prepare for what will happen if diplomacy fails. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.